April 7, 2003 was not just another day in the Iraq War. It was the kind of day where a single mistake could mean death. Two A-10 Warthog aircraft were cutting through the sky at high speed toward a battlefield that was already burning. Captain Kim Campbell sat inside the cockpit, completely focused, her hands steady but her mind alert. Her call sign was Killer Chick, and she was flying alongside her mission leader, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Turner. Their mission was simple on paper, but nothing about war is ever simple. They were assigned to provide close air support to ground troops trapped near a strategic bridge north of Baghdad. Ahead of them, a massive sandstorm stretched across the horizon like a wall of chaos. The storm was thick, blinding, and dangerous, making visibility nearly impossible. Suddenly, the radio came alive with urgency. A ground commander's voice broke through the static, filled with panic and desperation. He reported that his unit was taking heavy fire and needed immediate air support. Enemy forces had surrounded their position and were attacking with rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns. Every second that passed increased the risk of losing men on the ground. Kim tightened her grip on the control stick as she processed the situation. This was no longer just a mission, it was a fight to save lives. The coordinates were confirmed, and the target was locked in. But the sandstorm stood directly in their path, like a barrier between them and the battlefield. Without hesitation, Turner rolled his aircraft upside down and dove straight into the storm. Within seconds, his jet disappeared completely into the swirling dust. His voice came through the radio, calm and controlled, telling Kim that it was now her turn to follow. For a brief moment, there was silence in her cockpit as she prepared herself. Then she pushed forward and followed him into the storm. Inside, everything turned dark and unstable as the aircraft shook violently. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and she could no longer rely on sight. She trusted only her instruments as the plane fought against the turbulent air. After what felt like an eternity, they finally broke through the storm, and what they saw below them changed everything. The city beneath them was consumed by chaos. Explosions erupted across the streets, sending smoke and debris into the air. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky like glowing lines of fire. It looked less like a battlefield and more like a living nightmare. Enemy forces on the ground quickly spotted the incoming aircraft. Within seconds, anti-aircraft guns were turned upward toward the sky. Then the firing began. Explosions burst dangerously close to the aircraft, shaking them violently in mid-air. Inside her cockpit, Kim felt the impact of the shock waves. She realized instantly that they were no longer just attacking, they were now targets. Turner moved in first for the attack run. He descended low toward the bridge, using speed and precision to stay ahead of enemy fire. The bridge appeared through the haze like a ghostly structure, partially hidden by smoke. The enemy was positioned underneath it, using it as cover from aerial attacks. Turner lined up his shot and pulled the trigger. The A-10's powerful cannon unleashed a deafening stream of rounds at incredible speed. The ground beneath the bridge erupted as the rounds slammed into the structure. Dust, debris, and fragments of concrete exploded into the air. After completing his pass, Turner pulled up sharply to escape incoming fire. Now it was Kim's turn. She pushed her aircraft into a dive and aligned her sights with the target. Her breathing slowed as she focused completely on the attack. Then she fired. For several seconds, her cannon tore through the battlefield, sending a storm of rounds into the target area. The bridge shook under the impact, and the ground below was ripped apart once more. Then she pulled up, escaping just ahead of the anti-aircraft fire. For a brief moment, there was silence again. Then, the radio came alive. The ground commander reported that the attack had no effect. The enemy was still firing and still holding their position. Kim felt a wave of frustration, but there was no time to think. The mission was not over, and the danger was only increasing. Both aircraft turned back into position for another attack. This time, they flew lower and faster, pushing closer to the danger zone. But now, the enemy was ready. They knew exactly where the aircraft would come from. As the Warthogs approached, the sky filled with tracer fire. Bright red streaks passed dangerously close to the aircraft from all directions. Every second in the air now felt like a gamble with death. One mistake would be enough to end everything. Turner's voice came over the radio, steady but intense. He signaled that he was ready for another run. Kim responded immediately, confirming that she was ready as well. There was no hesitation left, only determination. Turner opened fire again, sending another wave of destruction toward the bridge. This time, the angle was different, forcing the enemy to react. The round struck closer to the hidden positions beneath the structure. Some of the enemy were forced to move, exposing themselves briefly. Turner completed his attack and pulled up. Now it was Kim's turn again. She dove in and fired with full force, targeting the same area. The roar of her cannon echoed across the battlefield as the ground was torn apart once more. The attack looked powerful, but the result was the same. The enemy was still alive and still fighting. The bridge continued to protect them from direct fire. Even the A-10's devastating weapon could not fully reach them. The situation was becoming more critical with each passing moment. The ground troops still needed help, and time was running out. Turner made a decision that would change everything. He ordered a switch in tactics. The guns were no longer enough. They would now use rockets. Kim understood immediately what that meant. The next attack would be more powerful, but also far more dangerous, because now there was no room for error.
Turner committed to the new plan and prepared for a rocket attack that could finally break the enemy position. Hydra rockets were powerful but unguided, which meant accuracy depended entirely on timing and aim. He descended again, flying dangerously low over the river to line up the shot. Anti-aircraft fire surrounded him, but he held his course without hesitation. The targeting system calculated the firing solution as he kept the aircraft steady. At the exact moment the target aligned in his sight, he fired. A volley of rockets launched forward, leaving trails of smoke as they raced toward the bridge. Explosions rippled across the structure, shaking it with intense force. For a brief second, it looked like the attack might have worked, but the radio quickly confirmed the truth. The rockets had impacted the surface of the bridge and failed to reach the enemy underneath. The threat was still active, and the ground troops were still under fire. Turner cleared the path for Kim and gave her permission to begin her attack run. She acknowledged immediately and moved into position for her approach. She followed the same low path over the river, aligning her aircraft with the target. This time, however, the enemy was fully prepared for her arrival. As she closed in, an enemy soldier below tracked her aircraft with a shoulder-fired missile system. He waited patiently for a lock, watching her through the targeting sight. Kim focused entirely on the bridge and prepared to fire her rockets. She did not know that she was already being targeted. She launched her rockets, sending multiple projectiles toward the enemy position. The explosions followed seconds later, shaking the ground beneath the bridge. As she pulled up to escape, the enemy soldier achieved a lock. Without hesitation, he fired the missile. The missile surged into the sky, leaving a thick trail of smoke behind it. It accelerated rapidly, closing the distance between itself and the aircraft. Kim had no warning. She had no time to react. The missile struck near the rear of her aircraft with a violent explosion. The blast filled her canopy with light and shook the entire plane. The aircraft jerked violently and the nose dropped toward the ground. Warning alarms immediately flooded the cockpit with noise. Turner's voice broke through the chaos over the radio, reporting that her aircraft had been hit. On the ground, enemy fighters celebrated as they believed they had taken her down. Inside the cockpit, Kim struggled to understand what had just happened. Her instruments were flashing with warnings, and multiple systems were failing at once. She tried to regain control by pulling the stick, but nothing responded. The aircraft continued to descend toward the city below. She checked her systems and realized the worst possible scenario had occurred. Both hydraulic systems had completely failed. Without hydraulics, she had almost no control over the aircraft's movement. The plane was no longer responding to normal inputs. She faced an immediate and terrifying decision. She could eject and survive, or she could attempt to save the aircraft. Below her was enemy territory, where ejection could mean capture or worse. There would be no guarantee of rescue. She made her choice quickly and without hesitation. She refused to eject over Baghdad. Instead, she switched to manual reversion mode. This mode allowed limited control using pure mechanical force. Now, every movement of the aircraft would depend entirely on her physical strength. There would be no assistance from hydraulic systems. She pulled the control stick with both hands, using all her strength. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, the aircraft began to respond. The movement was minimal, but it was enough. She continued to pull, forcing the aircraft to turn away from the city. Each adjustment required intense effort and concentration. The aircraft weighed thousands of pounds, and she was fighting it alone. Every second tested her strength and determination. Tracer rounds continued to pass around her damaged aircraft. Turner stayed close, doing everything he could to protect her. He instructed her to deploy countermeasures in case another missile was launched. She released flares and chaff to defend against further threats. Despite the chaos, she maintained focus and kept pulling the aircraft away from danger. Gradually, she gained enough control to climb out of the combat zone. She finally reached safer airspace above the battlefield, but the situation was far from over. Turner flew alongside her and began assessing the damage to her aircraft. What he saw was far worse than expected. The fuselage and tail were covered in holes from the explosion. Fragments had torn through critical sections of the aircraft. There was a large hole in the stabilizer, and one of the engines had taken heavy damage. Parts of the aircraft were still burning. He chose not to reveal the full extent of the damage. Instead, he reassured her that the aircraft was still flyable. Kim knew the situation was serious, but she remained calm. She made the decision to attempt a return to base. She stated clearly that she would take the aircraft home. Turner confirmed that he would stay with her the entire way. The journey back was long and exhausting. Every movement required physical effort as she maintained control manually. She jettisoned unnecessary weight to improve her chances of survival. but some equipment could not be removed, making the aircraft unstable. For nearly an hour, she fought to keep the aircraft in the air. Her strength and focus never wavered. Finally, the base came into view in the distance. It was her only chance to land safely. She prepared for landing using limited control. Even lowering the landing gear required extra effort. As she approached the runway, she carefully adjusted speed and alignment. Every small movement had to be controlled manually. Just moments before touchdown, the aircraft suddenly rolled to one side. It was an unexpected and dangerous movement. She reacted instantly and corrected the roll with all her strength. The aircraft stabilized just in time. Seconds later, the wheels touched the runway. She had done it. The aircraft came to a stop, and the danger was finally over. Relief replaced the tension that had filled the cockpit. Other pilots on the radio celebrated her survival. They knew how close she had come to disaster. Despite everything, she had remained calm and controlled. She had survived one of the most dangerous situations a pilot could face. Her aircraft was too damaged to fly again, but she had brought it back when it should have been lost. Her actions earned her one of the highest honors for bravery and skill. But more importantly, she proved something greater. That even in the worst possible moment, courage and determination can overcome the impossible. And on that day, she did not just survive the war, she mastered it.